right, so you're walking down the road and this seedy-looking guy pops out of a dark alley and goes, hey kid, come here. What are you gonna do? Of course you're gonna go over and say, yes, what can I do for you? And he goes, hey kid, come here. Draw me a picture of short-run cost. And you'll whip out your trusty highlighter and you'll go, well, my good man. Short-run cost looks like this. There's average variable cost. There's average total cost, and there's marginal cost. And that's what short-run cost looks like. And then he's going to go, yeah. Hey, that's great. But what about long run? What does long run average cost look like? So let's talk about long run. Now, I'll go back to what we said earlier, right? In the long run, both variables, labor capital, are variable. And this is what the long run looks like. So we'll call this long run average cost. Okay? All right. So let's make this the cost side, and let's make this output. Okay? Now, for a new firm, you would expect cost structure to be high or low. Well, it's a new firm. They haven't figured out their business model yet, right? They're just getting started. So, you kind of expect a high cost structure, right? But over time, and especially over the production cycle and as output increases, most new firms experience something like that, okay? In which costs fall or decrease as output increases. And this right here is called economies of scale. Okay? So again, economies of scale are when your long run costs, right, decreased as your output increases. And again, like I said, it's sort of indicative of a new firm. But at a certain point, and let's talk about why that happens, right? And you solidify vendor relationships, you improve upon vendor relationships. This is where supply chain comes in, and you really hone your supply chain and your logistics side, get those costs down, and all of that again comes with sort of breaking in to a new business, right? But at a certain point, you have your cost structure kind of figured out, right? And during that period of time in the long run, where your cost structure remains constant as output increases, again, this would be sort of indicative of an established firm. One that, again, has sort of figured out its supply chain and logistics and really sort of squeezed cost out of all of the different cost centers. This is called constant returns to scale. And then a lot of times firms experience something like this, where the cost structure increases as output increases and as time goes on. And this is called diseconomies of scale. And this is really indicative of a mature firm that's been around a while. They've probably been a leader in their industry, in their field. Maybe they've gotten a little complacent. Maybe they've gotten a little, they've taken their eye off the ball, right? They may be too focused on the revenue side and boosting revenue, and have not paid close enough attention on the cost side, and costs are creeping up. And again, indicative of a mature firm and referred to as diseconomies of scale. Now let's talk about this, because when a firm reaches this point, there's only two things really that will happen in the long run. One is they'll just go out of business. If a firm can't get their cost under control, I'm not going to write it on the board, but think revenue minus cost equals profit, right? And if revenue, we'll just say revenue is constant and costs continue to increase, then what's that do to profit? Decreases, and you know, firm in the long run, a firm can't exist with diminishing profits for forever. Okay, so one of two things happens: they reach here and they die, or think about this. What's the difference between this point and this point? Really nothing, right? I mean, it's the same cost level, and so really they're the same point. So this point really not only is a new firm, but it could be a mature firm that's figured out, oh, our cost structure is way too high. We need to do something about this before we go out of business. And in fact, just a quick example of what I'm talking about was Porsche, right? So Porsche started out as a car company in 1948 after World War II. They had existed prior to that as an engineering firm, and continued, you know, as an engineering firm, but became a car company in 1948, building small little sports cars, you know, out of kind of leftover VW parts. And their big claim to fame was they built these small, nimble, small displacement engine cars that really were able to take on the much larger, more powerful race cars, because the big cars were, you know, super fast on the straight, but then you hit curves and not quite as nimble and didn't handle as well. And Porsche kind of carved out a name for themselves in that market. So, you know, throughout the 50s and 60s, their cost structure sort of fell. And certainly, you know, by the 60s or so, they had sort of figured out and had become an established firm, and their product became ever more popular. You know, James Dean, I mean, there's a couple famous, actually, tragedies in that case. James Dean died in a Porsche 550 Spider in the 50s, and you know, anyway, very popular race car, and they continued. But a funny thing happened by the late 80s and into the early 90s. Their cost structure started to increase, and by the mid 90s, they were sort of here. And to their credit, they recognized, oh, we got to do something about this, or we're not going to last. We're going to go the way of you know, hundreds of other car manufacturers like Tucker and, you know, otherwise that have sort of come and gone. And so, yeah, Porsche found themselves with at a high sort of cost structure, and hired a consulting firm who came in and helped them get their cost under control. And, you know, now Porsche's back to here with kind of constant returns to scale, and, you know, with their cost under control, and enjoying the fruits of being a well-established sports car maker. So again, that's what long-term costs look like versus the long-run cost looks like versus the short-run cost that we talked about in the previous video.